Whalley Village is almost diabetic now because of the traffic, inasmuch as King Street, the main artery, pulses with congestion. But as soon as you leave said blockage, the surrounding capillaries of somnambulant avenues become numb, deadened by gardeners in straw hats and pinafores and the ghosts of monks from the Abbey ruins. That was one hell of an ambitious metaphor. Let's just leave it there and move on. We've covered the life and times of said abbey before in some now derelict, long-forgotten episode. However, the toll-free car park just inside the 14th century gatehouse, the emphasis being on the toll-free bit, allowed us to park up, polish off our egg butties, and start our exploration of the village proper. We could have had lunch at the cafe next door to said gatehouse, but it's the sort of place where Rishi Sunak's wife would be checking a bank account just to buy an ice cream, so we didn't. Even though the aforementioned gatehouse is the one that most people would instantly recognise because of the car park, there's a much larger, more impressive version of it just around the corner, which we thought we'd take a gander at. It's all very gothic and impressive, with vaulted ceilings and pokey old doors and a cathedral-esque ambience. Behind its rear entrance, or its front entrance, depending on your double entendre of choice, stands the equally impressive, although not so architecturally flamboyant, viaduct, known locally as the Whalley Arches, allegedly. It was built in 1850, consists of 41 arches in total, 2 of which collapsed during construction, killing 3 people. Not the most amusing anecdote, I must admit, and it's the longest railway viaduct in Lancashire, which makes it the best in the world, ever. Speaking of the Abbey, which we weren't, but let's not get bogged down in semantics, a long time ago there was a watermill attached to the Cistercian stronghold, the wheel of which can still be seen to this day. You have to take a wander down the appropriately named Cornmill Mews and look through the grating. Whalley's full of interesting hidden bits of history. Then there's the parish church of St Mary, Anglican by denomination, although it predates the C of E by over 1,000 years. Officially having been erected, well, Wikipedia officially anyhow, in 628 AD. It's mentioned in the Domesday Book. There are 3 ancient crosses in the graveyard by way of evidence for its incredible age. They're generally reckoned to be Anglo-Saxon. They look more Norse to us, but we're not about to launch ourselves into a pointless debate, so we'll let that one pass for now. There's also a Grade 2 listed sundial from 1757, but isn't there always? Travelling even further back in time than the Anglo-Saxon crosses, I mean, not the sundial, there appears to be some repurposed carved Roman sandstone in the exterior wall, which fits historically with the Roman altar inside the church, suggesting there was a temple on the site before Christianity was even a twinkle in the Archangel Gabriel's eye. In fact, St Mary's is turgid with historic bric-a-brac, such as the misericords, wooden bum rest for the choir if you're not familiar with the term, elaborately carved with just about everything from St George and the Dragon to a peasant being beaten by his wife. The choir stalls themselves were carved in 1430 by Mr Eatough. Exactly why Mr Eatough's name is down on record when most other craftsmen of the period were considered too low status to be documented, we couldn't honestly say. There's a 15th century font with a 17th century oak lid. There's the church warden's pew from 1690. Presumably the church warden was extremely fat, like Eric Pickles, because it seats 8. There's St Anton's cage, originally constructed in 1534 to house the Knoll family of Reed. Don't ask me, perhaps they were aggressive worshippers. There's the obligatory piscina and a very large organ. The carry-on crew would be proud, dating from 1727. Then there's the grave of Abbot Paslew, moved into an upright position against the wall because everybody was walking over it and wearing it out. He gets mentioned a lot around these parts. He was martyred for his part in the Pilgrimage of Grace, his death being forewarned by the ghost of a monk. We've mentioned him ourselves in previous episodes, so we'll leave it at that. We almost forgot the 14th century door knocker. The list goes on, but we won't. St Mary's is not so much a church as a museum. Somewhere in Whalley there are some almshouses, but because we weren't sure what almshouses look like, we just filmed a few random buildings instead. One cottage, we were informed by somebody somewhere, back in the days when the Abbey was still a functioning body, was used by the monks to store their fishing rods in. There are 3 pubs in Whalley: the Swan Hotel, established 1780, the De Lacy Arms, established who knows when, and the amusingly named Dog Inn. Amusingly named if you're a puerile 60-year-old with the sense of humour of a pre-teen anyhow. There's another Dog Inn in Clitheroe. They're obviously into dogging activities down the Ribble Valley. There's also the remains of the old grammar school, which has a certain Jane Austen appearance about it. Behind the Abbey, although officially separated from the tourist bit, close by the pleasant Edwardian English Martyrs Roman Catholic Church, I could live in a building like that. It's very A.A. Milne, stands a derelict barn, which we assume was once the dormitories for the aforementioned monks. It's in a ruinous state, bombarded by scores of nest-building blackbirds on the afternoon that we visited. Its flying buttresses barely able to hold up an asthmatic stick insect, let alone a building of such considerable weight. Its stone-carved windows propped up by bolts of wood. It's worth a look around, mind, although it might be wise to wear a hard hat, if only for the carved Tudor gateposts, which takes the art of idle vandalism to extraordinary new heights, or new depths if you're not a fan of Banksy. Outside the village there's Portfield Fort, an Iron Age site of archaeological significance. We couldn't find it. The field it's in appears to be completely fenced off, so we went for a picnic at Springwood Nature Reserve instead. Springwood Nature Reserve was once owned by Whalley Abbey. Needless to say, it wasn't a nature reserve back in those days. Nowadays it's one of the oldest surviving natural woodlands in Britain. It's also very steep and hard on the knees to climb, and apart from the views it wasn't very exciting. So we buggered off home instead, via the Chinese takeaway. And that just about wraps it up for this episode. There's probably loads that we've forgotten, but we can't remember everything. Click like if you're feeling brave enough, subscribe if you want, but whatever else you do, join us again for the next indefatigable episode of Lancashire Footnotes.